I'm Colonel Sarah Lee, 40 years old, and I built my career from the ground up, 20 years of service, deployments, and decisions that shaped missions across the world. For years, I gave everything to my family: money, patience, and second chances. But the day they mocked my uniform on the way to the airport, then heard my rank announced over the loudspeaker, I made a choice to stop needing their approval. Have you ever been dismissed by the people you worked hardest to make proud? If you've ever been underestimated, belittled, or written off by those closest to you, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to prove your worth after being underestimated, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about earning respect the hard way. What happened next might surprise you. I sat in the back seat of my mother's sedan, uniform pressed and perfect, watching the highway signs count down to the airport. The fabric felt heavier than usual that morning, not the weight of the jacket itself, but something else. Something I couldn't name yet. "You're really wearing that?" my mother asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. Her tone carried that particular blend of disbelief and disappointment I'd known since childhood. I didn't answer. There wasn't much to say. I was due at Nellis Air Force Base by 1800 hours, and regulations required proper uniform for military travel when reporting for duty. This wasn't a choice. It was protocol. My brother Daniel sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through his phone. He'd flown in from Portland 2 days ago, between jobs again, sleeping on our mother's couch. At 34, he still hadn't quite figured out what he wanted to be when he grew up. He looked back at me and smirked. "Halloween isn't for another 3 months, Sarah." I kept my eyes on the passing landscape. Years in the service had taught me when to engage and when to let things roll past. This was the latter. "I'm serious," my mother continued. "People are going to stare. Can you just wear normal clothes and change when you get there?" "No, ma'am." The formality made Daniel snort. "Ma'am. Jesus, Sarah. You sound like a robot." I'd been home for 72 hours. 3 days of leave before my new assignment, and already I was counting down the minutes until I could return to base. To a world where my uniform meant something. Where people understood what the insignia on my shoulders represented. The conversation in the car had been building for years, really. Small comments that accumulated like sediment. When I'd first enlisted at 22, fresh out of college with a degree my father had paid for, expecting me to follow him into corporate law, the family had treated it like a phase. A rebellious detour before I came to my senses. That was 18 years ago. I'd worked my way up from second lieutenant, through the ranks, through assignments in Afghanistan, South Korea, Germany. I'd spent 4 years at the Pentagon. I'd commanded a logistics squadron. I'd briefed generals and managed budgets that exceeded the GDP of small nations. Last month, I'd been promoted to Commander 05, equivalent to a lieutenant colonel in the Army. At 40 years old, I'd earned every stripe, every bit of responsibility that came with this uniform. But to my family, I was still playing dress-up. "Remember when she wanted to be an astronaut?" Daniel said, his voice carrying that edge of nostalgia people use when they're really just mocking you. "Then a veterinarian? Then a lawyer like Dad." "She was always trying on different costumes," my mother agreed. I thought about the last time I'd sent money home. 2 years ago, when Daniel's startup had collapsed and he needed help with rent. $3,000, wired without hesitation. He texted a thumbs-up emoji. Nothing else. The year before that, I'd flown home for my father's funeral. I'd worn my dress blues. My mother had asked if I could wear something else to the service. Something less conspicuous. We pulled into the departures terminal at 1000 hours. The automatic doors slid open, and the familiar chaos of the airport enveloped us, rolling luggage, shouting children, the constant drone of announcements overhead. Daniel grabbed his phone and took a photo of me adjusting my cover. "This is going on Instagram," he said. Caption: "Sister thinks she's G.I. Jane." "Delete that," I said quietly. "Oh, come on. It's funny." "Delete it, Daniel." He held my gaze for a moment, then shrugged and pocketed his phone. I couldn't tell if he'd actually deleted it or not. Probably not. My mother walked ahead toward the check-in counter, her heels clicking against the tile. She dressed up for the airport, as if seeing me off required performance. Pearl earrings. A silk scarf. The armor of a woman who'd spent her whole life worried about what other people thought. I'd inherited some of that anxiety, I suppose. But the military had beaten it out of me, replaced it with something more useful. Not confidence exactly. Competence. The knowledge that I could do my job regardless of who was watching. At security, I placed my bags on the conveyor belt and stepped into the scanner, arms raised. The TSA agent nodded me through without comment. Behind me, I heard Daniel's voice. "Ma, look, she's saluting the TSA guy." I hadn't been. I'd simply been standing at attention, muscle memory from 2 decades of service. But I heard the snicker, heard a couple of travelers turn to look. My mother's whisper carried farther than she intended. "This is mortifying." I collected my belongings and moved toward the gate area. They followed. Of course they followed. My mother had insisted on walking me to the gate, something about wanting to see me off properly. I suspected she just wanted to make sure I actually got on the plane and didn't change my mind about leaving. The terminal was crowded. A military family sat near Gate 3, a young soldier in army fatigue saying goodbye to his wife and 2 small children. The kids were crying. The wife was trying not to. I recognized that scene, had lived versions of it myself. We found seats near my gate. Gate 4. The monitor showed my flight to Las Vegas on time, boarding in 40 minutes. Daniel stretched out in his chair, legs extended into the aisle. "So, what exactly do you do again?" "Like, day to day." I'd explained this a dozen times over the years. He'd never retained any of it. Logistics coordination. Supply chain management. Personnel oversight. So like, office work. Strategic operations planning. Right. Office work. My mother patted my knee. "Well, it's nice that you've found something you enjoy, sweetie. Even if it's not what we expected." The condescension was so smooth, so practiced, that it almost didn't register as an insult. Almost. I'd stopped trying to make them understand years ago. Stopped bringing them to ceremonies, stopped sending photos from overseas assignments, stopped sharing the parts of my life that mattered. It was easier that way. Less disappointing. A little girl in a pink dress, maybe 5 years old, walked past with her father. She stopped in front of me, staring with wide eyes. Then, slowly, she raised her small hand in a salute. I returned it, crisp and proper. She giggled and ran back to her father, who mouthed "thank you" over her head. Daniel rolled his eyes. "Oh my God, she's encouraging it." "Encouraging what?" I asked. "The whole hero worship thing." "You're not actually," he stopped himself, but I knew where the sentence was going. "You're not actually important. You're not actually special. You're not actually anything worth saluting." My mother checked her watch. "When do you board?" 30 minutes. "Maybe we should get coffee," she suggested. "Before you go." I didn't want coffee. I wanted to board the plane, wanted to get back to Nevada, back to work. Back to a place where my presence wasn't treated like an embarrassing phase I'd eventually outgrow. But I said, sure. We stood, gathered our things. Daniel snapped another photo when he thought I wasn't looking. My mother fussed with her scarf. And then the PA system crackled to life. "Commander Lee, please report to Gate 4. Commander Sarah Lee, Gate 4. The words hung in the air like an explosion. I watched my mother's face shift through several expressions: confusion, recognition, something else I couldn't quite identify. Daniel's smirk faltered. I turned and walked back to the gate, alone, my footsteps steady and measured. Behind me, I heard my mother whisper, "Did they just say Commander?" At the gate, a man in a pilot's uniform stood waiting. Captain's bars on his shoulders. He was maybe 50, graying at the temples, and when he saw me approaching, his posture straightened. He saluted. "Welcome aboard, ma'am. Pleasure to have you on the flight." I returned the salute. "Thank you, Captain. Flew C-130s out of Ramstein back in the day," he said. "Retired 5 years ago. Saw your name on the manifest and wanted to pay my respects." We shook hands. Brief, professional. The kind of exchange that happens between people who understand what the uniform means. Not the costume. The commitment. I boarded before general boarding, as was standard for active-duty military. Walked down the jet bridge alone. Found my seat in economy. The Air Force didn't spring for first class unless you were a general, and stowed my bag. Through the window, I could see my mother and Daniel still standing at the gate, watching. Daniel had his phone out again, but this time he wasn't smirking. My mother's hand was pressed to her mouth. I didn't wave. The plane filled with passengers. The flight attendant stopped by my seat, offered me water with a smile. Someone in the row behind me was crying. Not unusual. Airports made people emotional. When I was 10 years old, my father had taken me to an air show at Andrews Air Force Base. I'd watched the Thunderbirds perform, stunned by the precision, the coordination, the way those jets moved like they were thinking with one mind. Afterward, a female pilot had signed my program. She'd been 30-something, calm and confident in her flight suit, and when I'd asked her how she got the job, she'd said, "One day at a time and all at once." I'd understood then, even if I couldn't articulate it, that I wanted to be someone who earned that kind of respect. Not demanded it. Earned it. The engine started. The captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming everyone aboard, mentioning the weather in Vegas. And as we pulled away from the gate, I felt something shift. Not anger at my family. Not even satisfaction at their shocked faces. Just clarity. They'd never really seen me. And maybe that was okay. Maybe I'd spent too many years trying to make them see something they were never going to understand. I closed my eyes as the plane lifted into the air, the ground falling away beneath us. Somewhere below, my mother was probably calling my phone, which was still in airplane mode. Daniel was probably texting. I'd answer eventually. I always did. But first, I had a base to report to. I joined the military the summer after college graduation, despite my father's quiet disapproval radiating across the dinner table like heat from a furnace. He'd paid for 4 years at Georgetown, expecting a law degree to follow, expecting me to join his firm downtown, wear pencil skirts and heels, argue cases about tax law and corporate mergers. Instead, I'd enlisted. Officer candidate school, then my commission as a second lieutenant. My mother had cried at the ceremony. Not proud tears. Worried tears. Confused tears. "Why would you do this?" she'd asked in the parking lot afterward, mascara smudged. "After everything we gave you?" I hadn't known how to explain that everything they'd given me had felt like a costume too. The sorority they'd wanted me to join. The internships my father had arranged. The boyfriend from a good family who'd proposed junior year with a ring his grandmother had worn. I'd said no to all of it. The uniform had been the first thing that felt like mine. Those early years were brutal. Not the physical training, I could handle that. Not even the long hours or the remote postings. It was the loneliness. The sense of being unmoored from everything I'd known, relearning how to exist in a world governed by different rules, different values. My first assignment was Fort Hood, Texas. Logistics support for deployed units. I was 23 years old and responsible for tracking millions of dollars in equipment, coordinating supply chains that stretched across 3 continents. I worked 16-hour days and slept in a studio apartment with air conditioning that barely functioned. My family visited once. My mother complained about the heat. Daniel, 20 at the time and halfway through college, spent most of the weekend playing video games on his laptop. My father toured the base with me, nodding politely at everything I showed him, but I could tell he was just waiting for it to be over. Waiting for me to admit I'd made a mistake. I didn't call home much after that. What was there to say? By 26, I was a first lieutenant stationed in South Korea. By 29, I'd made captain and deployed to Afghanistan. Kandahar Airfield, managing supply convoys through hostile territory, learning to write casualty reports when things went wrong. And things went wrong often. I sent emails home occasionally. Updates about promotions, about moving to new bases. My mother replied with news about Daniel's latest job, about her book club, about the neighbor's daughter who'd just made partner at a consulting firm. The subtext was always there. See what normal people accomplish? When I was 32, Daniel called me in the middle of the night, mourning for him in Portland. His startup was failing. He needed $15,000 to keep it afloat. Just a loan, he'd insisted. He'd pay me back. I'd sent 10,000. It was what I could afford. He'd texted a thumbs up emoji. Nothing else. 6 months later, the company folded anyway. He never mentioned the money again. Neither did I. At 34, I was promoted to major and assigned to the Pentagon. The work was different there: policy briefings, strategic planning sessions, meetings that stretched until 2,200 hours. I wore the uniform every day, walked the same corridors as generals and admirals, learned to navigate the politics of high-level military operations. My father died that year. Heart attack, sudden and massive. He was 63. I flew home for the funeral in my dress blues. It was regulation, appropriate for military personnel attending services. But when I walked into the funeral home, my mother's face had tightened. "Did you have to wear that?" she'd whispered. "It's proper funeral attire, Mom. It's attention-seeking." I'd stood in the back during the service, listening to colleagues from his law firm talk about his dedication, his brilliance, his mentorship. No one mentioned me. When people asked my mother about her children during the reception, she'd talked about Daniel's latest venture, a tech startup, very promising. Me, she'd mentioned in passing, Sarah's still in the military. Still. As if I were stuck. As if I hadn't chosen this, hadn't built a career, hadn't earned every rank through competence and sacrifice. I went back to work 3 days later. Buried myself in briefings and reports and the clean logic of supply chain management. It was easier than grief. At 38, I took command of a logistics squadron in Germany. 300 personnel under my supervision, operations spanning 14 countries. I was good at it. I knew I was good at it. My evaluation said as much. My subordinates respected me. My superiors trusted me with increasingly complex assignments. But when I called home to tell my mother about the promotion, she'd said, "That's nice, honey. Daniel just got engaged." I'd sent a generous gift for the engagement. A Le Creuset set, expensive and thoughtful. The wedding was postponed 6 months later. Then postponed again. Eventually, it just faded away, never mentioned except as a joke Daniel made about dodging a bullet. My mother had asked me once, during a rare phone call, if I'd ever thought about settling down. Finding someone. Starting a family. "I have a family," I'd said. 300 airmen. She'd sighed like I was being deliberately obtuse. The truth was, I'd had relationships over the years. A fellow officer in South Korea, though fraternization rules had made it complicated. A civilian contractor in Germany who couldn't handle the deployments, the long absences, the way the military structured my entire existence. A logistics analyst at the Pentagon who'd eventually admitted he found my rank intimidating. None of them had lasted. Not because I couldn't commit. Because I'd already committed to something else. Last year, my evaluation had recommended me for promotion to 05. Commander. Lieutenant Colonel equivalent. It meant more responsibility, more authority, more trust placed in my judgment. It meant I'd spent 20 years proving myself over and over until there was no question about my capability. The promotion ceremony had been small. A few colleagues, my commanding officer, the standard photos for official records. I'd invited my mother and Daniel. They'd said they couldn't make it. Schedule conflicts. I'd stood there alone, hand raised, reciting the oath I'd already taken so many times I knew it like a prayer. The words meant something different now. Not a promise about who I'd become. A recognition of who I already was. After the ceremony, I'd gone out for drinks with a few fellow officers. We talked about upcoming assignments, rotations, the usual speculation about policy changes from Washington. It was a good evening. Easy. Comfortable in a way family gatherings never were. One of the captains, a woman named Maria Ortega who'd recently transferred to my command, had raised her glass. To Commander Lee, she'd said, "Who makes this job look easier than it is?" We'd all drunk to that. And I'd felt something I rarely felt around my family, seen. The flight to Vegas took 3 hours. I spent most of it reviewing briefing documents for my new assignment at Nellis, going over personnel rosters, familiarizing myself with the base's operational priorities. Work. Always work. It was the one constant, the one thing that never disappointed. When we landed, the pilot's voice came over the intercom again. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to thank Commander Lee for her service. Commander, thank you for flying with us today. A few passengers around me turned, smiling. One man started clapping and others joined in. Brief, sincere, the kind of recognition that happens sometimes in airports, on flights, in restaurants near military bases. I nodded acknowledgement, kept my expression neutral. It was nice, sure. But it wasn't why I wore the uniform. I deplaned and headed toward ground transportation. My phone, switched off airplane mode, immediately vibrated with messages. 7 from my mother. 4 from Daniel. I didn't read them yet. Outside, the Nevada heat hit like a physical force. 108 degrees, dry and relentless. I'd been stationed in hotter places. This was manageable. A staff car was waiting as arranged. The driver, a young senior airman, saluted when I approached. Commander Lee? That's me. Welcome to Nellis, ma'am. I'll get you to base housing. We drove through Las Vegas, past casinos and hotels, toward the base on the northern edge of the city. The airman made small talk, where I was coming from, how I liked the assignment so far. Standard conversation. I answered politely, keeping things professional. My phone kept buzzing. Finally, sitting in traffic on the interstate, I opened my mother's messages. The first few were variations on the same theme. Call me. Sarah, please call. We need to talk. Then, I didn't know. I didn't realize. You should have told us. And finally, I'm sorry. We're sorry. Please call when you land. Daniel's messages were shorter. That was crazy. Mom's freaking out. Are you actually a big deal? I put the phone away. The thing about respect is that you can't demand it. You can't explain your way into it. Either people see you, or they don't. Either they understand what your work means, or they reduce it to something they can dismiss. My family had never asked what I did. Not really. They'd never asked about the deployments, the briefings, the times I'd had to write letters to families whose loved ones weren't coming home. They'd never asked about the months in Afghanistan when I'd slept 4 hours a night and worked through mortar fire. They'd never asked about the medal I'd received for managing a supply crisis that could have cost lives. They'd never asked because they'd never wanted to know. And maybe that was my fault too. Maybe I'd stopped offering information when it became clear they weren't interested. Maybe I'd let the distance grow because it was easier than constantly defending myself. But today, in that airport, something had shifted. Not because a pilot had saluted me. Not because they'd finally heard my rank announced over a loudspeaker. Because I'd realized I didn't need them to understand. Their approval, their acknowledgement, their pride, I'd spent years waiting for those things. Hoping that eventually, they'd see what I saw when I put on this uniform. I was done waiting. We arrived at Nellis just after 1,500 hours. The airman helped me with my bags, gave me directions to the housing office, saluted again before driving away. I stood there for a moment, looking at the base. Aircraft hangars in the distance. The flight line shimmering in the heat. F-16s and F-22s, and all the machinery of air power arrayed across the tarmac. This was home. More than my mother's house had ever been. More than any city I'd grown up in. I checked into housing, dropped my bags in a small but clean 2-bedroom unit, and changed into a different uniform. Then I reported to my new commanding officer, a colonel named Patterson who'd requested me specifically for this assignment based on my record. Commander Lee, he said when I entered his office. Good to have you here. We've got a logistics challenge that needs your expertise. Can you start tomorrow? Yes, sir. 0800? Perfect. I saluted. He returned it. And I walked back out into the Nevada afternoon, feeling lighter than I had in days. That evening, I finally called my mother back. She answered on the first ring. Sarah. Hi, Mom. I've been trying to reach you all day. I know. I was traveling. Silence on the line. Then, we didn't know. About your rank. About what you've been doing. You never asked. More silence. I could hear her breathing, hear the television in the background. Daniel's voice somewhere in the distance. I'm sorry, she said finally. We should have. I should have paid more attention. I thought about what to say. There were a lot of options. I could tell her it was fine. I could tell her it wasn't fine. I could explain, again, what my career meant, what I'd accomplished, why this mattered. Instead, I said, I appreciate that. Will you come home for Christmas? It was July. She was already planning, already trying to rebuild something. And maybe that was worth something. Maybe the fact that she was trying meant more than I wanted to admit. I'll see what my leave schedule looks like. Okay, good. We'd really like to see you. We talked for a few more minutes. Surface-level conversation. The weather. Daniel's latest job prospect. Her plans to redecorate the guest room. Then we said goodbye, and I set my phone down. I didn't feel angry anymore. Didn't feel vindicated or satisfied or anything dramatic. Just clear. I made dinner, unpacked my bags, set up my uniforms in the closet. Tomorrow would start early. Briefings at 0800, then a tour of the facilities, then meetings with my new team. Work. Structure. Purpose. The things I'd built my life around. And that was enough. Nellis Air Force Base sat on the northern edge of Las Vegas, close enough to see the city's glow at night, far enough to feel like a different world entirely. I'd been stationed there 3 weeks when I started to settle into the rhythm of command: early mornings, late nights, constant problem-solving. My team was good. Professional. They respected the rank and, gradually, they began to respect me. That's how it always worked. Respect for the position came with the promotion. Respect for the person had to be earned. Captain Maria Ortega was assigned to my squadron 2 weeks after I arrived. 20 years old, sharp, ambitious in the way good officers should be. She'd come from a logistics posting at Ramstein, recommended by a colonel I'd worked with in Germany. Her first day, she knocked on my office door at 0730, 15 minutes before our scheduled meeting. "Commander Lee," she said. "Permission to enter?" "Come in, Captain." She stepped inside, spine straight, uniform immaculate. I recognized something in her posture, that particular blend of confidence and uncertainty that marked junior officers who were ready for more responsibility but hadn't quite figured out how to claim it. "Have a seat," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. She sat, hands folded in her lap. Professional. Controlled. "Welcome to Nellis," I said. "I've reviewed your file. Impressive record." "Thank you, ma'am. Tell me about Ramstein. What were you working on?" She relaxed slightly, launched into a detailed explanation of supply chain coordination for European operations. She was articulate, thorough, clearly competent. The kind of officer you wanted on your team. When she finished, I asked, "What do you want from this assignment?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "Ma'am, everyone wants something from their next posting. Command experience. Technical expertise. A stepping stone to something else. What do you want?" She considered this for a moment. To be taken seriously. I understood that immediately. By whom? By. She hesitated. Everyone, I guess. My peers. My superiors. My family. There it was. That last word dropped like a weight. "Tell me about your family," I said. She looked uncomfortable. "Is this relevant to the assignment, ma'am?" "Probably not. But I'm asking anyway." She shifted in her seat. "They don't really understand what I do. My father wanted me to be a teacher. My mother thought I should get married, have kids. My brothers think I'm wasting my education." "What did you study?" "Engineering. MIT. I nodded. "And they think serving your country is a waste of that degree?" "They think I'm running away from real life." I'd heard variations on that sentiment before. From my own family, from friends who'd left the military, from civilians who couldn't quite grasp why someone would choose this life. "Captain," I said, "you're going to spend your career justifying your choices to people who don't want to understand them. You can exhaust yourself trying to make them see your perspective, or you can focus on the work. One of those options is productive." She met my eyes. "You sound like you're speaking from experience, ma'am." "I am." We worked together well over the following weeks. She was quick, adaptable, willing to put in extra hours when operations demanded it. She reminded me of myself at that age, hungry to prove something, not quite sure to whom. One evening, after a particularly long day dealing with a supply shortage that threatened to ground a training squadron, we grabbed dinner at the base dining facility. It was nearly 2000 hours, and the place was mostly empty. Can I ask you something, Commander? Ortega said, picking at her salad. Go ahead. How do you deal with it? The family stuff. I considered the question. I stopped expecting them to understand. That helped. Doesn't it bother you? Sometimes. But I learned to separate what I can control from what I can't. I can't control their perception of my career. I can control how I do my job. She nodded slowly. My mom called last week. Asked when I was going to quit and come home. Said I'm almost 30 and still playing soldier. Playing soldier. The phrase made my jaw tighten. What did you say? Nothing. I didn't know what to say. You don't owe her a defense, Captain. You don't owe anyone a defense. She looked at me then, really looked at me, like she was trying to figure out if I actually believed that or if I was just saying what commanders were supposed to say. It's easier said than done, she said quietly. Most things worth doing are. We finished our meal in comfortable silence. Before we left, she said, thank you, ma'am. For being honest. Anytime. The work at Nellis was challenging in the way I liked, complex logistics problems that required creative solutions, coordination across multiple squadrons, constant adaptation to changing operational needs. I was good at it. I'd spent 2 decades becoming good at it. My commanding officer, Colonel Patterson, trusted me with increasing autonomy. By month 3, I was essentially running logistics for the entire wing, managing budgets that ran into hundreds of millions, overseeing personnel decisions, briefing senior leadership on readiness issues. It was the kind of responsibility that validated every choice I'd made. Every deployment. Every missed holiday. Every relationship that hadn't worked out because the military came first. This was who I was. Not in spite of the sacrifice, but because of it. I spoke to my mother every few weeks. The conversations were cordial, surface level. She asked about my health, about whether I was eating properly, about whether Nevada was too hot. She didn't ask about my work. I didn't volunteer information. Daniel called once, drunk, at 2300 hours on a Saturday. He rambled about how impressive the airport incident had been, how he'd shown the video to his friends. Yes, he'd taken a video, of course he had, and they'd all thought it was cool. You're kind of famous now, he'd said, slurring slightly. I'm not famous, Daniel. I'm just doing my job. No, you should see the comments. People think you're badass. I'd ended the call shortly after. Internet comments weren't why I wore the uniform. They didn't validate anything. What validated it was getting a squadron of aircraft mission-ready ahead of schedule. What validated it was mentoring junior officers like Ortega. What validated it was knowing that the work I did kept people safe, kept operations running, kept the machinery of national defense functioning smoothly. That was enough. 6 months into my assignment at Nellis, we had a crisis. A major deployment to the Middle East required rapid mobilization of equipment and personnel. The timeline was aggressive, 72 hours to get everything in place. It meant round-the-clock coordination, solving problems in real time, managing logistics across multiple time zones. My team worked continuously. Ortega practically moved into the operations center, sleeping in 4-hour shifts, fueled by coffee and determination. I was there alongside her, making decisions, clearing obstacles, ensuring nothing fell through the cracks. On hour 68, for hours before the final deadline, we hit a critical shortage. Medical supplies that should have been staged in Qatar were still sitting in a warehouse in Germany due to a paperwork error. If we couldn't get them to theater on time, the deployment would be delayed. And delays in military operations could cost lives. I got on the phone with logistics coordinators in 3 countries, called in favors, pulled strings I'd been building for 20 years. By hour 71, the supplies were airborne. By hour 72, everything was in place. Mission accomplished. Colonel Patterson called me into his office the next morning. Commander Lee, he said, that was exceptional work. You and your team just saved a critical operation. Thank you, sir. Just doing our job. It was more than that. I'm recommending you for early consideration for 06. Colonel. The rank seemed distant, almost abstract. But Patterson wasn't given to empty flattery. I appreciate your confidence, sir. You've earned it. Keep doing what you're doing. I called my mother that evening. I'm not sure why. Maybe because the promotion recommendation felt like something I should share. Maybe because some part of me, despite everything, still wanted her to be proud. "That's wonderful, honey," she said when I told her. "What does that mean, exactly?" "It means more responsibility. More authority. It's a significant promotion." "Well, that's great. Your father would have been proud. Would he?" I wasn't sure. He'd wanted me to be a lawyer. He'd wanted me to follow his path, carry on his legacy. This was something else entirely. "Thanks, Mom. Will you be coming home for Christmas this year?" It was September. 3 months away. "I'll try. Depends on the schedule." It would mean a lot to us. To me. Us. The word felt loaded. Us implied a unit, a family, something cohesive. But we'd never really been that. We'd been people who shared DNA and history and not much else. "Still," I said, "I'll do my best." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet base housing unit, staring at the wall. The place was furnished but impersonal, standard military-issue furniture, bare walls, nothing that marked it as mine. I'd lived in places like this for 20 years. Temporary housing, temporary assignments, temporary everything except the work. And I was fine with that. More than fine. It was the life I'd chosen. But sometimes, in the quiet, I wondered what it would have been like to have a family that understood. A family that asked questions, that wanted to know about deployments and operations, and the people I served with. A family that saw the uniform as something other than a costume. I thought about Ortega, about her question. How do you deal with it? The answer, I realized, wasn't that you dealt with it. You just lived with it. You accepted that some people would never see you the way you saw yourself. And you moved forward anyway. That was the real discipline. Not the early mornings or the physical training or the strict adherence to regulations. It was the discipline to keep showing up, keep doing the work, keep believing in something even when the people who mattered most to you didn't believe in it at all. I went to bed at 2200 hours, set my alarm for 0500, and slept the deep, dreamless sleep of someone who'd earned their exhaustion. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, new opportunities to prove, once again, that I belonged exactly where I was. And that would have to be enough. Christmas leave came faster than I'd expected. One day it was September, crisp desert mornings and long operational planning sessions, and then suddenly it was mid-December and Colonel Patterson was asking about my leave plans. "I'll be heading home," I told him. "Pennsylvania. Seeing family." "Good," he said. "You've earned the break." I booked a flight for December 23rd, returning the 27th. 4 days. Long enough to meet family obligations, short enough to maintain my sanity. The morning I left, Ortega stopped by my office. "Safe travels, Commander," she said. "Hope it goes well with your family." I looked up from packing my briefcase. "Define well." She smiled. "No major incidents. Minimal passive-aggressive commentary. General survival. Setting the bar appropriately low." "I appreciate that." "I'm going home too," she said. "Boston. My mom's already started asking when I'm going to give her grandchildren." "What's your answer?" I told her the Air Force doesn't issue children along with housing assignments. I laughed. "How'd that go over?" "About as well as expected." She said I've become cold. She means strong. Maybe. We stood there for a moment, 2 women in uniform, preparing to go home to families who didn't quite know what to do with us. "Good luck, Captain," I said. "You too, ma'am." The flight to Philadelphia was uneventful. I wore civilian clothes this time, jeans, a sweater, practical winter boots. No reason to invite commentary before I'd even arrived. My mother picked me up from the airport. She looked older than I remembered, her hair more gray than brown now, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there last time I'd visited. When had that been? 2 years ago? 3? "Sarah," she said, hugging me briefly. "It's so good to see you." "You too, Mom." We drove to the house in silence, broken occasionally by her commentary about traffic, about the weather, about the neighbor's new renovation. Safe topics. Neutral ground. Daniel was at the house when we arrived, sprawled on the living room couch with his laptop. He'd put on weight, I noticed. He was 36 now, still floating between projects, still sleeping on our mother's couch between apartments. "Hey," he said, not looking up from his screen. Hey, my mother hovered nervously. I put you in your old room. I hope that's okay. I wasn't sure how long you were staying, so I didn't move anything around. 4 days. And that's fine. 4 days. Her face fell. Oh, I thought maybe you'd stay through New Year's. I have to get back to base. Can't you extend it? No. The word came out harder than I'd intended. She flinched slightly, and I felt a familiar guilt creep in. The guilt of disappointing her. Again. That first evening was awkward. Dinner around the table, my mother asking careful questions about Nevada, about whether I was eating enough, about whether the heat was manageable. Daniel scrolling through his phone between bites. Me answering politely, keeping everything surface level. No one asked about my work. About the deployment I'd coordinated, about the promotion recommendation, about any of it. Instead, my mother talked about her friend Linda's daughter, who'd just been made partner at a consulting firm. About the neighbor's son who'd gotten engaged. About all the milestones of civilian life that marked progress in ways she understood. After dinner, I helped with dishes. My mother washed, I dried, the familiar rhythm from childhood. I'm glad you're here, she said quietly. I'm glad to be here. It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. I've been thinking, she continued, about that day at the airport. In July. I kept drying the plate in my hands, not looking at her. We embarrassed you, she said. I embarrassed you. It's fine. It's not fine. I didn't understand. About your rank, about what you've accomplished. I should have been proud instead of, she stopped, searching for the word. Dismissive, I supplied. She nodded. Yes. That? I set the plate down. Mom, you've never understood my career. That's not new. I want to understand. Do you? Or do you want to feel less guilty about not understanding? The question hung between us like smoke. She was quiet for a long moment, hands still in the soapy water. Then, maybe both. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in years. What do you want to know? I asked. She turned to face me, drying her hands on a towel. What do you actually do? Day to day. So I told her. Not everything, some things were classified, and some things she wouldn't understand anyway, but enough. I told her about logistics coordination, about supply chains that kept aircraft mission-ready, about managing budgets and personnel and operations that spanned continents. I told her about the deployment I'd just coordinated, about the 72 hours of constant work, about what was at stake when military operations depended on getting the details right. She listened. Really listened. And when I finished, she said, that sounds incredibly stressful. It is. But it's also what I'm good at. Your father used to say that about his work. That the stress was proof he was doing something that mattered. I'd never thought about my father and I having anything in common. But maybe we did. Maybe we'd both chosen careers that demanded everything, that consumed time and energy and left little room for anything else. Do you regret it? She asked suddenly. Not having a different life? I thought about the question. Thought about the relationships that hadn't worked out, the holidays I'd missed, the years spent in foreign countries away from everyone I'd known. No, I said. I don't regret it. Are you happy? Happy felt like the wrong word. Too simple for something complicated. I'm fulfilled, I said. That's better than happy. She nodded slowly, like she was trying to understand a foreign concept. The rest of the visit passed in a careful dance of politeness. Christmas Eve dinner with relatives who asked awkward questions about my love life and whether I'd ever settle down. Christmas morning with gifts that showed they'd tried a nice leather bag, a cashmere scarf, things that were expensive but impersonal. Boxing Day spent mostly in my room, catching up on work emails, grateful for the excuse to be alone. Daniel and I barely spoke. He seemed content to pretend I wasn't there, and I returned the favor. On my last evening, my mother made my favorite dinner from childhood, pot roast with potatoes and carrots, rolls from the bakery downtown, apple pie for dessert. It was a peace offering, I understood. An attempt to bridge the gap. This is great, Mom, I said. Thank you. I'm glad you liked it. After dinner, she handed me an envelope. What's this? Just open it. Inside was a card with a generic Christmas message and a check for $5,000. Mom, I can't take this. Yes, you can. You sent Daniel money when he needed it. You never asked for it back. Consider this an apology. You don't need to apologize with money. I know, but I want you to have it. Buy something for yourself. Something you wouldn't normally buy. I looked at the check, at her earnest face, at the vulnerability in her eyes. Thank you, I said quietly. We hugged then, longer than we had in years. And for a moment, it felt like maybe we could find our way back to something resembling understanding. The flight back to Nevada was delayed 2 hours due to weather. I sat in the terminal in my civilian clothes, watching families say goodbye, watching soldiers in uniform board early, watching the endless cycle of arrival and departure that defined airports. My phone buzzed. A text from Ortega, survived Christmas. You. I typed back, survived. See you at 0800 Monday. Her response was immediate, looking forward to it. That was the difference, I thought. At work, people looked forward to seeing me. They valued my presence, my expertise, my leadership. Home would always be complicated, would always carry the weight of expectations I couldn't meet and disappointments I couldn't fix. But work was mine. The uniform was mine. The respect I'd earned was mine. And that had to be enough. When I finally boarded the plane, I took my seat by the window and watched Philadelphia disappear beneath the clouds. My mother had tried. In her way, she'd tried to see me. Maybe that was progress. Maybe that was all I could ask for. The plane leveled off at cruising altitude, and I opened my laptop, reviewing briefing documents for a meeting scheduled first thing Monday morning. Work. Always work. But this time, it didn't feel like running away. It felt like going home. The promotion to 06 came through in March. The official notification arrived in my office at 1400 hours on a Tuesday, delivered by Colonel Patterson himself. Congratulations, Colonel Lee, he said, emphasizing the new rank. Well deserved. I stared at the orders in my hands. Colonel. 21 years after I'd first put on the uniform as a second lieutenant. 21 years of proving myself over and over until there was no question left. Thank you, sir. The ceremony is scheduled for April 15th. You'll want to start thinking about who you'd like to invite. I nodded, but my mind was already elsewhere. Who would I invite? Colleagues, certainly. Subordinates who'd worked under my command. Fellow officers I'd served with over the years. Family? That question lingered longer than it should have. The promotion ceremony for 06 was more formal than previous ones. It would be held in a proper venue, not just someone's office. There would be speeches, a reception afterward, the whole traditional military ceremony. I sent the information to my mother 2 weeks before the event. Just the facts, date, time, location. No pressure. No expectations. She called the same day. Of course we'll be there, she said. Daniel and I. We wouldn't miss it. You don't have to, Sarah. We want to. Please. Let us be there. There was something in her voice I hadn't heard before. Not obligation. Not guilt. Something closer to genuine desire. Okay, I said. I'll arrange visitor passes. Thank you. The weeks leading up to the ceremony were consumed with transition planning. I'd be taking over command of a larger logistics wing, responsible for operations across multiple bases. It was a significant increase in scope, in responsibility, in visibility. Ortega stopped by my office one afternoon, a week before the ceremony. Big day coming up, ma'am, she said. How are you feeling? Like I've been preparing for this my entire career. You have been. She hesitated, then said, Can I tell you something? Of course. When I first got here, I was intimidated by you. You seemed so, together. So certain about everything. I'm not. I know that now. But watching you over the past year, seeing how you handle pressure, how you deal with people who underestimate you, it's been instructive. You're doing fine, Captain. Better than fine. Because I have a good example to follow. The comment caught me off guard. I'd mentored junior officers before, but there was something different about Ortega. Something that reminded me of myself at her age, still figuring out how to exist in a world that didn't always welcome women like us. You called me a role model once, she continued. I didn't realize how much I needed one until I got here. So, thank you. You don't need to thank me for doing my job. Maybe not. But I wanted to anyway. April 15th arrived with clear skies and temperatures in the low 80s. Perfect ceremony weather. I arrived at the venue at 0700 hours to oversee setup. The event coordinator had everything under control, seating arranged, podium positioned, sound system tested. But I checked anyway. Old habits. My mother and Daniel flew in the night before. I'd arranged hotel accommodations near the base, given them a brief tour yesterday afternoon. They'd been quiet, taking in the flight line, the hangars, the sheer scale of operations at Nellis. This is impressive, my mother had said, watching an F-16 taxi down the runway. It's home. Now, at 0900 hours, I stood in the staging area, adjusting my uniform one last time. The new rank insignia, the Silver Eagle, sat waiting in a wooden presentation case. In 30 minutes, Colonel Patterson would pin it on my shoulders, and I'd officially join the ranks of senior military leadership. I thought about my father. About how he'd wanted me to be a lawyer, to follow his path. Would he have been proud of this? Maybe. Or maybe he'd have still been disappointed that I'd chosen something different. Either way, I'd made my peace with it. The ceremony began precisely at 0930. The room was full, colleagues, subordinates, friends I'd served with over the years. And in the third row, I saw my mother and Daniel. She wore a navy dress and pearls. He wore a suit that looked like he'd borrowed it for the occasion. They'd come. That meant something. Patterson delivered remarks about my service record, about the operations I'd managed, about the respect I'd earned from peers and subordinates alike. It was standard stuff, but hearing it spoken aloud still felt surreal. Then came the actual pinning. I stood at attention while Patterson removed my O5 insignia and replaced them with the silver eagles of a full colonel. "Congratulations, Colonel Lee," he said, saluting. I returned the salute, feeling the weight of the new rank settle onto my shoulders. Not physical weight. Responsibility. After the formal ceremony came the reception. People approached with congratulations, handshakes, brief conversations about future assignments. I moved through it professionally, graciously, aware of my mother and Daniel hovering at the edges of the crowd. Finally, I made my way over to them. "Well," Daniel said, "that was something. Thanks for coming." "I'm proud of you, Sarah," my mother said quietly. I know I should have said that more often over the years. But I'm saying it now. I'm proud of you. The words landed differently than I'd expected. Not validation, exactly. I didn't need her pride anymore. But it was nice to hear anyway. "Thank you, Mom." "All these people," she said, gesturing to the room. "They all respect you so much." I could see it. I've worked hard for that respect. I know. I see that now. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "So, what does a colonel actually do?" I smiled. "Depends on the assignment. In my case, I'll be overseeing logistics operations for the entire wing. Managing personnel, coordinating with other commands, making sure operations run smoothly. Sounds stressful. It is. But it's what I'm good at." He nodded, still looking uncomfortable. "Then, I'm sorry. For the airport thing. For all the times I made fun of your uniform. It was stupid." The apology surprised me more than my mother's pride. Daniel didn't apologize easily. "Thank you," I said. "That means something." We stood there awkwardly for a moment, three people who shared DNA and history and not much else, trying to figure out how to exist in the same space without friction. "There's a restaurant downtown," I said. "If you want to grab dinner tonight. Before you fly out tomorrow." My mother smiled. "We'd love that." Dinner that evening was different than Christmas. Easier somehow. We talked about safer topics, Daniel's new job prospect, my mother's garden, the cherry blossoms in DC that I'd missed during my Pentagon assignment. But then my mother asked, "What's next for you?" "After this. More of the same, probably. Maybe another command assignment. Eventually, if things go well, 07. General. It's called Brigadier in the Air Force. But yes, that would be the next rank up. Do you think you'll make it?" I considered the question honestly. Maybe. Probably not. Only about 1% of officers make general. But I'll do good work regardless of whether I pin on another star. You've already accomplished so much, she said. There's always more to do. Daniel spoke up then. Do you ever think about what else you might have done? Like, if you hadn't joined the military. Not really. This is what I chose. I don't spend much time thinking about alternate versions of my life. No regrets. Everyone has regrets. But not about this. We finished dinner around 2100 hours. I drove them back to their hotel, promised to visit again soon, though we all knew soon was relative in military life. My mother hugged me before going inside. Thank you for letting us be part of this. Thanks for coming. I mean it, Sarah. Today was special. You looked so confident up there. So certain. I don't think I've ever felt that certain about anything in my life. You raised 2 kids as a single parent after Dad died. That takes certainty. She smiled. I suppose it does. Daniel gave me an awkward half-hug. Congrats, Colonel. That's pretty cool. Thanks. I drove back to base alone, windows down, desert air rushing through the car. The ceremony had gone well. My family had shown up. People had said kind things. But what struck me most was how little any of it changed anything fundamental. I was still the same person I'd been yesterday. Still committed to the same work. Still walking the same path I'd chosen 21 years ago. The validation was nice. The promotion was an honor. But it wasn't why I did this. I did it because when I put on the uniform every morning, I knew exactly who I was. I did it because the work mattered, because supply chains kept aircraft flying and operations running and people safe. I did it because I was good at it, and being good at something really, truly excellent at it was its own reward. Back in my office that night, I looked at the new nameplate that would replace the old one. Colonel Sarah Lee. 21 years to get here. And if I never advanced another rank, if this was as far as I went, it would still be enough. More than enough. It would be exactly what I'd earned. Colonel didn't feel different at first. The uniform was the same except for the insignia. The work was largely the same, just broader in scope. But gradually, I noticed the subtle shifts, the way people deferred to my judgment more readily, the way my recommendations carried more weight in meetings, the way junior officers looked at me with something approaching reverence. I'd officially become senior leadership. That came with its own set of responsibilities. 2 years into my command at Nellis, I received orders for a new assignment, Travis Air Force Base in California, overseeing logistics for the entire Pacific Theater. It was a massive operation, coordinating supply chains across dozens of countries, managing operations that touched everything from humanitarian missions to combat deployments. It was also a clear signal that the Air Force was investing in my career. Travis was a stepping stone assignment, the kind that preceded serious consideration for general officer. I called my mother to tell her about the move. California, she said. That's farther away. Only by a couple hours. Still, I was getting used to you being in Nevada. I'll still visit. When I can. We'd settled into a pattern over the past 2 years. Regular phone calls, brief visits twice a year, a relationship that was functional if not close. She made an effort to understand my work, asking questions that showed she'd been paying attention. I made an effort to be present during visits, to engage with her life even when the conversations felt stilted. It wasn't perfect. But it was better. Daniel had finally landed a stable job, account manager at a software company in Portland. He'd moved out of our mother's house, rented his own apartment, seemed to be building something resembling a career. We texted occasionally, mostly memes and brief check-ins. It was the extent of our relationship, and that was fine. The move to Travis happened in July. I spent the first month familiarizing myself with operations, meeting key personnel, identifying problem areas that needed attention. The base was larger than Nellis, the operations more complex, the stakes higher. I loved it. Ortega had been promoted to major and transferred to a posting in Japan. We stayed in touch via email, brief updates about our respective assignments. She was doing well, commanding her own logistics squadron, applying everything she'd learned. You were right, she wrote in one email. About not needing their approval. It gets easier the further you get from trying to prove yourself to people who don't understand. I smiled when I read that. She'd figured out what had taken me decades to learn. My third year as a colonel, I deployed to Qatar for 6 months. Combat logistics support for operations in the Middle East. It was intense, demanding, occasionally dangerous. I thrived. When I returned, Colonel Patterson, now General Patterson, promoted and moved to the Pentagon, called me into a video conference. "Colonel Lee," he said, "I'm recommending you for consideration for '07. Brigadier General. The first star." I sat very still, processing the information. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. It's a long process. Promotion boards, evaluations, interviews. No guarantees. I understand. But between you and me, you've earned this. Your record speaks for itself. The promotion process took 8 months. Multiple interviews with senior leadership. Comprehensive reviews of my entire career. Evaluations from colleagues and subordinates. It was exhaustive and exhausting. I didn't tell my family. No point in getting their hopes up if nothing came of it. But in February, the notification came through. I'd been selected. Pending congressional approval, routine for general officer promotions, I'd pin on my first star in May. Brigadier General Sarah Lee. I sat in my office, holding the notification, trying to comprehend what it meant. 1% of military officers make general. I was about to become part of that 1%. Not because of luck. Not because of connections. Because I'd spent 24 years being excellent at my job, over and over, until there was no question about whether I deserved it. I called my mother that evening. "Hi, honey," she answered. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. I have news. Good news. I've been promoted to Brigadier General." Silence on the line. Then, "Oh my God. Sarah. That's incredible. The ceremony is in May. If you want to come." "Of course we'll come." "Absolutely. Daniel too. We'll both be there." Her voice was thick with emotion. Genuine emotion, not the performative kind. "Thank you, Mom." "No, thank you. Thank you for letting us be part of this. For not giving up on us even when we didn't understand. Thank you." The ceremony was larger than the one for Colonel. Held at Travis in a hangar, with hundreds of attendees. General Patterson flew in from D.C. to officiate. Senior leadership from across the Air Force attended. It was formal, traditional, exactly the kind of military pomp that civilians often mocked, but that meant everything to those of us who'd earned our place in it. My mother and Daniel sat in the front row this time. She wore the same navy dress from 2 years ago, pearls around her neck. He wore a better suit this time, one that actually fit. The ceremony proceeded according to protocol. Patterson delivered remarks about my service, about the rarity of this promotion, about what it meant to join the ranks of general officers. Then he pinned the single silver star on my shoulder. "Congratulations, General Lee," he said. I saluted. He returned it. And, just like that, I'd become one of the most senior officers in the United States Air Force. At the reception afterward, my mother was crying. "I'm so proud of you," she kept saying. So proud." Daniel shook my hand, looking genuinely impressed. "This is really something, Sarah. I mean it. This is amazing. Thank you." "I'm sorry," he said suddenly. "For all those years. For not understanding. For making fun of something that clearly meant so much to you. I was an idiot. You were young. I was old enough to know better." I looked at him, my brother, nearly 40 years old, finally growing up, and felt something soften. "It's okay," I said. "Really." My mother approached then, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course. Your father would have been so proud. I know he didn't understand when you first joined. I know he wanted something different for you. But this," she gestured to the star on my shoulder. "He would have been so proud." Maybe that was true. Maybe not. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. I'd stopped trying to live up to my father's expectations 20 years ago. "Thank you, Mom." We took photos, formal ones with Patterson, casual ones with my family, group shots with my team. I moved through it all with practiced grace, aware that this moment would be remembered, that it marked something significant. But more than that, I was aware of how complete I felt. Not because of the promotion. Not because my family had finally shown up and said the right things. Because I'd become exactly who I'd set out to be. That evening, after the ceremony, after the reception, after my family had flown home, I sat in my office and looked at the star on my uniform. One star. Maybe there'd be more someday. Maybe not. Either way, I'd done what I'd set out to do. I'd proven that a girl from Pennsylvania who wanted to serve her country could make it to the highest ranks of military leadership. That dedication and excellence and refusing to quit could carry you further than anyone expected. I thought about that moment at the airport years ago. My family mocking my uniform. The pilots saluting me. The shock on their faces. It felt like a different lifetime. A different person. Because I wasn't that commander anymore, uncertain and hurt by their dismissal. I was a general now. One of fewer than 1,000 people in the entire country who held this rank. And I'd earned every bit of it. I picked up my phone and texted Ortega, "Made General. Thought you'd want to know." Her response came immediately, "Congratulations, ma'am." "That's incredible." Followed by, "You give me something to aim for." I smiled, set the phone down, and looked out my office window at the flight line. Aircraft taxiing, taking off, landing. The constant motion of military operations, never stopping, always pushing forward. This was my world. This was where I belonged. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely, absolutely at peace with that. The years after pinning on my first star moved quickly. Assignments blurred together. Pentagon briefings, theater command responsibilities, operations spanning from South Korea to Germany to the Middle East. I was constantly moving, constantly working, constantly proving that the Air Force's faith in me had been well placed. At 47, I pinned on my second star. Major General. 08. My mother and Daniel came to that ceremony too. It had become routine by then, this pattern of showing up for the milestones. But their presence had changed over the years. It wasn't performative anymore. They genuinely seemed to understand what these moments represented. "I'm running out of wall space for your photos," my mother joked at the reception. "You could always take down some of Daniel's childhood participation trophies." He laughed. "Please do. Those are embarrassing." Daniel had gotten married the year before, a small ceremony in Portland, a software engineer he'd met at work. I'd flown in for the wedding, delivered a brief toast, flew back out the next day. His wife, Maya, was practical and kind and seemed to balance out his worst tendencies. They'd just bought a house. He was talking about kids. My mother was thrilled. She was going to be a grandmother. That had always been part of her plan for her children. I'd given her a star general. He'd given her a daughter-in-law and the promise of grandchildren. In her mind, we'd both finally become successful in our own ways. I stood at attention while 4 silver stars were pinned to my shoulders, the weight both literal and symbolic. At 56 years old, I'd reached a rank fewer than 50 people in the country held. Full General. Commander of Transportation Command. One of the most senior officers in the entire Department of Defense. The journey had taken 33 years. It started decades ago, when I was just a 2-star general at 50, assigned to the Pentagon overseeing Air Force logistics. The work was relentless, but I was in my element. Ortega, by then a lieutenant colonel, would grab coffee with me between endless meetings. "You make this look easy," she'd said once. "It's not easy. It's just familiar." She'd smiled. "That's the goal, right? Functioning despite the chaos. That's the entire military career in one sentence." Even after almost 30 years in uniform, even with the exhaustion and stress, I couldn't imagine doing anything else. This was what I wanted. The call about my 3rd star came on a Tuesday in March. General Patterson, now Chief of Staff of the Air Force, summoned me to his office. He stood when I entered, unusual given his rank. "Have a seat, Sarah. First name basis. Significant. You're being considered for promotion to 09. Lieutenant General." 3 stars felt almost mythical. Maybe 100 lieutenant generals in the entire military. I flew home that weekend to tell my mother. She was 68, still living in the same Pennsylvania house we'd grown up in. Daniel and Maya visited regularly with their daughter Emma. My mother had grown older, grayer, but more present. 3 stars, she'd said, eyes wide. "Oh, honey. That's extraordinary." She'd asked if I was happy, if I ever regretted not having a traditional family. I have a family, I'd told her. It just looks different than yours. And I'd meant it. Not happy in the way people imagined happiness, domestic contentment, quiet routines, but happy in the sense of fulfillment. Purpose. The satisfaction of knowing I'd spent my life doing something that mattered. The promotion ceremony in May was held at Joint Base Andrews. My entire family came, my mother, Daniel, Maya, little Emma in a dress printed with stars. Even cousins I hadn't seen in years showed up, suddenly proud to have a 3-star general in the family. At the reception, my mother had approached me near the windows. "You've come so far," she'd said. "We both have, Mom. Our relationship. It's better now. Because I finally started listening. Because we both started trying." She'd apologized for taking so long to really see me. And standing there together, watching military aircraft through the window, I'd realized she didn't need to understand my world anymore. She just needed to accept that it was mine. The assignment as Lieutenant General took me to U.S. Transportation Command at Scott Air Force Base in Illinois. Strategic mobility for all branches of the armed forces. When troops needed to deploy anywhere in the world, when equipment needed to move across continents, it all flowed through my command. The work was intense in a new way. Not harder, just bigger. I was tracking aircraft movements across 100 countries, coordinating with allied nations, briefing the Secretary of Defense on global mobility readiness. By 56, I was starting to think about what came after. Not retirement, but the endgame. Lieutenant General was often the terminal rank. Only a handful made 4 stars. I'd never allowed myself to imagine going that far. Setting expectations too high was a recipe for disappointment. But then Patterson called again. "There are options on the table," he'd said. "The kind that come with 4 stars. For stars. Full general. Maybe 40 in the entire U.S. military across all branches. People who commanded entire theaters, who advised presidents, whose decisions shaped national security policy." I'd spent my entire career focused on logistics, making sure the machinery worked. I wasn't a fighter pilot or a strategic bomber commander. I was the person who made sure everything else functioned smoothly. But maybe that was exactly why I was being considered. Modern warfare was as much about logistics as firepower. Supply chains, strategic mobility, global coordination, these were the elements that won wars now. And I'd spent 30 years becoming the best at it. The call came in April. The Secretary of Defense wanted to meet in person. "We want to promote you to 4 stars and assign you as Commander of Transportation Command," he'd said. "You're the right person for it." The promotion ceremony in August was the largest yet. The Secretary of Defense himself pinned on my 4th star. My mother was there, now 70, looking proud and tearful. Daniel with Maya and their 2 children. Extended family from across the country. Ortega, now a full colonel herself. As the ceremony began, I thought about that moment at the airport years ago. My family mocking my uniform. The pilot's salute. Their shock when they finally understood what it meant. I'd been a commander then. Oh, 5. Still climbing. Now I was a general. One of the most senior officers in the United States military. At the reception, my mother approached me near the end of the evening. "I was wrong," she'd said. "About everything. About your career. I spent so many years thinking you were wasting your potential. I was so wrong. You did something extraordinary. And I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I'd hugged her tight. "Thank you for being patient with me," she'd said. Later that night, alone in my quarters, I looked at the 4 stars on my uniform. I thought about the girl who'd joined the military at 22. The lieutenant in Texas Heat. The captain in Afghanistan. The major at the Pentagon. The colonel at Nellis. The general who kept climbing, kept pushing, kept refusing to accept she'd reached her ceiling. 33 years of early mornings and late nights and sacrifice and dedication. It had brought me here. They used to think I was playing dress up. Turns out, I was just becoming who I already was. I hung the uniform in the closet, set my alarm for 0500 hours, some habits never change, and went to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Greater responsibility. Higher stakes. But tonight, I allowed myself to feel what I'd earned. Pride. Not in the stars, but in the journey. I'd made it. On my own terms. And that was everything. I'm Colonel Sarah Lee. If this hit home, like, subscribe, and share with someone who's earning respect the hard way. Your turn. When did you realize you didn't need someone's approval to do your job well? Have you ever been mocked for your uniform or profession? How did you respond? What boundary changed a family relationship for the better, or ended it? Do you value being respected or being understood more, and why? Drop your answers in the comments. I read everyone.